Hey there everyone, Russ Hamilton here. Anyway, this video is about threat-induced stress. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of define it a little bit. We're going to talk about its effects, and we're going to talk about the things that we can do to mitigate those effects. And by knowing this and understanding it a little bit, it's going to make you actually safer out there. So let's get started. We're going to cram a lot of this into an itty bitty space so that way your teeny tiny attention spans don't wander off on this. All right. So when you're presented with a threat, when you're presented with a challenge, a lot of different things happen, most of them hormonal, and they cause a lot of physiological changes. You can have basically a few different little sets of responses to that, and those responses are as follows. Fight, flight. You can posture or hold your ground. You can freeze or faint, or you can surrender. And that's really about all you can do. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those. So fight or flight, everyone's heard one of those. Well, you know what? I added a few just because we know that those two things, although they happen, there are some gradations. There's some, gray areas and not so black and white areas. So as we go into this, basically, hey, fight. When it's go time, it's go time. You just got to get in there and handle your business. All right, flight. Yeah, hey, sometimes do we have to leave? You bet we do. Sometimes we have to do that tactical retreat thing, and we have to go and regroup and, come back with more of our buddies in order to carry the fight, carry the day, and, win, because winning is what it's all about. Okay, so the next one is posturing. Sometimes it's that whole, for lack of a better term, and not trying to offend anyone, but, Mexican standoff. Hey, here we are, they are there, and everybody's looking, maybe everybody's puffing up, but, no one's throwing any punches or anything yet. And so that's the point at which, usually, sometimes, I've been bad about it myself. You puff up and then, you got to end up grabbing the guy, putting the bracelets on him, whatever. But that is an option. That's where we are with some of this. So posturing and holding your ground. The next one is freeze or faint, right? So we see, freezing happen. Shouldn't ever happen to us, right? But I'm going to get to a different part of freezing here in a second. But if you freeze up, you just lose all ability to do anything. You're basically, trying to be as unobtrusive, unnoticeable as possible. This is what some animals do in the wild. This is something that we can't afford to do. For some people, though, it's so ingrained that this is not a job that they should be in. All right. Fainting is another thing. It's physiological. Some people have no control of it. Vasovagal response to, a threat, and they just keel over. Don't see it very often, but I have witnessed it a few times. Getting back to the freezing thing. So hesitation and freezing are not the exact same thing. You come into this as a new boot, and it's easy to get yourself into a position where sometimes you hesitate because you have a lot being processed. You have an attention overload, and you just haven't processed things enough time. You don't have enough training in that all of a sudden, you haven't, popped that clutch and got yourself into gear yet. So that is a problem, but it can be remedied. And so that's just, you have to learn to process things in the right order. You have to already know exactly what you're going to do, what you can do. The time to wonder about, hey, I wonder what use of force policy says. It's not out there. You have to have already thought all this shit out in order to be able to not hesitate. So if you don't want to hesitate, but you're still having some, attention overload problems as you start to deal with things, what you should start thinking about is getting yourself into action, getting yourself into gear, popping that clutch. So what can you do? You can take a step backwards. You can take a step forward. You can start giving commands. Don't get caught in a noodle loop, though. You don't want to just, give them over and over again. You ask, tell, make, and you get on that. Sometimes it's about keying your mic. Sometimes it's about, hey, you need to get ready and deploy your spray, deploy your baton, get ready to move, get ready to do whatever it is, but get yourself into some type of motion so that you can go from one link of action to the next link of action to the next. And a lot of times that'll straighten people right out. They'll quit hesitating because they start to do something. They make the first movement, a step forward, like I say, a step backward, whatever it is. All right. So talked about the freezing, talked about the fainting. Your last course, of course, this is something we're never going to do, right? We are never going to surrender. But in the real world, maybe that happens to some people, but it's just an option, but it's an option we should never pick. So now let's get into some of the physiological things that happen during this course of all of this, whether you want to call it combat-induced stress or threat-induced stress. So what happens to your body? So the first thing we're going to talk about are the things that happen to your muscles. So you have this increasing, rush of adrenaline in there. And so what starts happening to your muscles? And I'll tell you that this usually happens in relation to how fast your heart is beating. So anytime your heart starts beating and you crack, about that 110, 115, 120 barrier, what's happening is you start experiencing a decrease in your fine motor skills. So what are your fine motor skills? Well, trigger finger, first of all. So if you're out there on an escape, that can be a big setback if you don't have good trigger control. Also, whatever other small range functions that you're doing with regards to your weapon, whether it's, racking around, maybe, it's hitting that magazine release, maybe it's, getting that magazine back in there and ramming that home. If you have a weapons malfunction, clearing it starts to become a problem. And that's because that upper limit of where that heart rate set is at starts messing with you. So what does that mean? Well, if you're in better shape and better condition, your heart's going to be beating slower, and it's going to take longer for you to get to that point where your fine motor skills are jacked up. So think about that. It's a good reason to work cardio and everything else into your, routine to try and put you in a position where you can stay in the fight longer, or to put it in a better way, is just these close-end fine motor skills stay with you to the end of the fight, hopefully. All right, so there's a next set of motor skills that we're going to talk about, and those are complex motor skills. They're bigger movements, they're not as fine, they probably don't necessarily involve the fingers, but they're things that are complex, the things that we have learned to do. To grab our cuffs, perhaps, to start doing the things that we do when we're handcuffing people, depending on whatever your particular technique is. Maybe it's, moving into some kind of, you're tussling with a guy and you're going into a wrist lock and then an arm bar. These are complex things. And so when your heart is beating excessively fast and you start getting to the point that you start losing those, it can become an issue, because then all of a sudden we're at a point where we're maybe not fighting as effectively. But if you've trained, if you've, gotten your cardio to a decent spot, you can stay in that range longer where you do have access to those complex motor skills. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, last but not least, guess what comes to our rescue now? All right, gross motor skills, because guess what? Gross motor skills love it right at about 150 with that old heartbeat, right? So, you see that, getting up there to 150, and your gross motor skills are there, even though your complex and your fine motor skills are shot. So then what do you do about that? Well, sometimes all you can do is hook in and start going with the knees. Maybe all you can do is really, turn that body and get, hooks in, maybe some jabs, uppercuts, whatever it is, things, the larger muscles that involve the chest, the legs, having your glutes drive those things. We used to do this failure drill where all we could do is, we'd hook into the guy and he'd be holding the pad, and it was just knees, 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 knees for 3 minutes. I'll tell you what, if you can get to the end of that and still be effective, it's great. But now you know that when those first two motor skills, the fine and the complex, let you down, you still have those gross motor skills at your disposal, and you can still get in there and win that fight. All right? So, last but not least, one of the side effects of all of this stuff can be this: tremors, right? You get to the point where you're shaking, right? So if you're shaking, you're at the point of becoming really ineffective at anything and everything you do. You can't pick up your cuffs. Maybe you can't even deploy your spray. It's certainly, guesswork as to whether or not you're going to be able to flip your baton out, things like that. So before we start doing some of that stuff, what can we do? All right. We can start going through some breathing. All right. Box breathing, for instance, is great. And box breathing is just real simple. It's breathing in for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, breathing out. Also, you can just breathe deeply. Sometimes we're just trying to get more oxygen in there, and that'll start to steady things out. One of the things that I like to do is just to, try and start moving the muscles. I think of it as burning off the excess adrenaline. I don't know if that's an actual thing or not in the medical field, but I'm using up some of that, that release of those hormones that, start to, put you on your game to do the fight, flight kind of thing, so that you can, burn some of that off, start moving it around, moving up and down, and start settling yourself out so that you're not dealing with excessive shakiness. All right, so that does it with what we're talking about with the muscles. The next thing that we have to move on to, though, is our vision, because this is really, really important. And that what happens, during these times of crisis is often we will get tunnel vision, right? Our peripheral vision literally shuts down, and the only thing that we can see is the threat before us. And that's to the exclusion of other possible threats that are starting to develop or come our way. We don't want to do that, right? And yet there's an immediacy to having to deal with the threat before us. So that's one way that your training can come in. That's one of the ways that I was taught, when we're going in there and we're doing our baton strikes, we get in there, we get our licks in, and then, hopefully the subject goes down. Maybe he's no longer in the fight. Maybe he's trying to move away so that he's no longer an immediate threat. And then what can you do? Well, you're taking your step back. You're taking a chance to clear to the left, to the right. Your only real field of vision at any given time is, that 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. And if it suddenly is more like, where it's only at 12 o'clock, then you actually have to move your head to involve, any chance at seeing what's behind you on your 6. If you've got a partner there or something, you should actually take the time to try and clear behind you, assuming that the threat is down, assuming that that threat in front of you is mitigated. But it's always something that you have to practice. It's the same thing when you're out there on the range and, you're doing a failure drill, and 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. And then what do? You don't keep staring at the guy unless he has a weapon and he presents that immediate thing. If he's gone down, take a little bit of time to, look around you a little bit and make sure nothing else is coming your direction. Once again, always making sure that the threat in front of you is truly mitigated. But it's that thing about stopping for that second while you're in training and not out there in the real world that allows you to start thinking about, looking to the left, looking to the right, and managing some of those threats that could be around you. Because when you get out there, chances are you're going to forget that anyway. But maybe not. Maybe you'll start breathing good enough and put yourself into a position where you can actually see everything that's going on. Next thing we got to talk about, here we go. Hearing, right? So auditory exclusion. Yeah, it's a real thing. It can shut you down in that you don't hear other things, other warnings behind you, right? You don't hear commands. Maybe you're in the middle of a scuffle and you're down there on the ground with the guy and someone's telling you, let go of his hand, let go of his hand. You don't hear them. That's happened to me a number of times, where either I've tried to say, hey, let go of his hand so I can grab it and get the bracelets on, or, it's been said to me, and instead I'm still in the tussle and really, trying to work that arm or something, and I don't realize that someone is either there to help or that they're in a better position to grab that appendage and move it around and try and, end the fight, get the guy into bracelets or whatever. Also, it's a big deal because, with what's going on that radio, you may not hear that. You may not be hearing about, whether or not help's on the way. You may not be hearing about other things popping off in your near area. And so it becomes that issue where you have to slow it down, do some breathing, try and think and consciously react to what is going on that radio, or to commands that people are giving you, or to warnings that they're giving you about things that may be popping up behind you. Last but not least, tachypsychia. This is my least favorite one, because this one, it never helps no matter what you think it's supposed to do. This is the one where they talk about, everything goes into slow motion. But that's not really helpful, because it happens way faster than you think it does. And it doesn't really ever seem, I've had it happen to me several times, it doesn't seem like you have extra time to block or parry or do anything else. It's just that you're more appreciative of the fact that you're about to get your ass whooped, right? Sometimes it just speeds things up, but the main thing to remember is just that it distorts the time element, and it can make it difficult later on writing your report to relate to, how things actually happened in a linear order and how far apart they were. Anyway, this is Russ Hamilton. I'm going to be signing off. I hope you took some good things away from this, some plots, some plans to be able to mitigate some of these physiological things that happen to you. Anyway, I'm signing out.